I'm going to ask you to just take a minute, if you can. I just want us to start by just recognizing the context, the AU context. How can the goals outlined in AU Agenda 2063 be leveraged to advance women's economic empowerment and ensure inclusive growth across the continent? Any one of you want to answer that?
I'm the oldest, so. Pamela, I think firstly, thank you. And thank you for listening to us. Having been in this space of women and being detailed and intentional about it, I have found it important that we go to the source of the problem. We go to the source. And in our case, South Africa, what is the source? Many things. But almost 40% of the population of South Africa is in the rural areas. And as we would imagine, the majority of that is women. And so our directness about going to the rural areas was based on that. That is the source of our issues. And in there, you have institutional discord that we have to deal with. Most rural areas, the biggest asset is land. It's a fixed asset. Forget that it's 13% or 20%, but it is land. But even that little bit of asset, women are excluded from it. This time, not by the apartheid system. They are excluded by our own system. And so the source for me is that we have to rearrange that. Because land use is for food, it's also for livestock. Incidentally, even a simple thing like livestock, women are excluded, not by the apartheid system, by us. The fact that women are not allowed to go into a kraal, when in fact in the kraal is the goats and the sheep and the cattle. There's something deep about that. And so we have to rearrange that too. Either keep the kraal empty and move the goats and sheep and cattle to somewhere else. And let the men keep their kraal.
Thank you. I'm going to come back and ask you how you have done it with Wiphold. But let me,
sorry,
okay.
Sorry to interrupt. And I think, so seated among such illustrious women here, I probably want to give a practical example as well, because that's kind of what you are alluding to, right? Yes, and I think it's very important for people in this room to take away what do we do as an actionable next step coming out of here, right? Because we need some action to be able to drive this change that we want to see. So I'll give one example. As in terms of the Africa Agenda 2063, about how we as Africa start powering, the economy of Africa ourselves. One thing that MasterCard has done, and I'm really proud about this, is bringing technology which sat outside of Africa into Africa, specifically into South Africa. And that's something that I think, as a collective, as leaders in this room, we really need to think about how do we contextualize local solutions, and that's very important for powering our economies ourselves. Just one practical example.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. And then my next question, I think it's carrying on from this. What innovative approaches and partnerships can be cultivated to overcome the persistent challenges hindering women's full participation in Africa's economy, specifically, not necessarily specifically, but in alignment with the aspirations of the Agenda 2063. And then we can go back to Isay. Yeah.
No, thank you. Thank you very much. And good afternoon, everybody in the room. It was fascinating to listen to Sis Ntobeko earlier, and I said to her, we need to spend some more time together, because my perspective that I bring is that of I have seen a glimmer of hope in the horizon. And the glimmer of hope only comes because I work in an institution. I look after 14 countries. 14% of those countries are led by, 40% are led by women. 50% of the executives are women. They're young women. They were born in the 80s and 90s. And they come in and they ask questions. And they don't ask naive questions. They ask questions understanding that the role of a bank is to look after depositors, money. So, but they ask them within the context. So I'll give you an example. Our head of Africa regions, a young lady by the name of Mwansa Mutati, said we need to create spaces for women where they can be comfortable. So in 2 countries, she has launched a women-only proposition. In Zambia, it's called Anagazi. In Kenya, it's called Dada. And it's a place where you as a woman, the RMs, the proposition, the solutions are designed separately. Here in South Africa, a young lady by the name of Umpe Medzi says, why is it that we ask young people for guarantees when they come from the rural areas? Where are they going to get it from? What guarantee? So why is it, of course we're looking after depositors' money, but once a medical student has done first year and second year, their chances of passing are 80%. So now, why are those students on NSFAS? Surely the commercial banks should take over. Right now, as we know, NSFAS is not funding postgraduate studies. So all the chartered accounting students that were on NSFAS and undergrads are not funded. She's busy going across the country to all the universities and says, we will fund these students. They're graduates. You don't need guarantees. They don't need surety. So what I'm saying is, because, to the point that Sis Ntokozo made earlier on, when you put young women in the position where they can ask questions and make decisions, they come up with creative solutions, because the answer to Africa's problems, and the world's problems, in fact, can only be solved by African young people.
Okay. It's a learning from those who have gone before them.
And you know what it is? I think that what we do for them is to give them space and air cover. But the questions they ask are questions that we never had enough bravery to ask.
Great.
And I think maybe that's what we give them. We give them security to ask those questions.
Great. Thank you so much. And then I come back, Dr. Serobe, anything you want to add on that?
Okay. Maybe if I can, and thank you for the opportunity. I think, again, if we think about like how practically do we take this forward, right? We've talked about financial inclusion and specifically access to credit as being an issue. And we've talked about, fintechs and innovation and how do we get businesses, specifically women-led businesses, to kind of tap into that. And I'll give a couple of practical examples of what we are trying to do. So in Nigeria and Kenya right now, we are piloting some models with our partners to look at alternative ways of looking at credit scoring, because you don't have, I think our honorable speaker, Ntobeko, highlighted that 37% of women still don't have access to formalized banking sector. So you don't have this kind of traditional way of assessing credit. And we are trying to look at alternative data sets. We are working with the fintechs. We are working with new data to look at how we can start having credible models for lending without overburdening, because that's the affordability aspect that you've got to get into context, right? So that's one. And then secondly, I think what we're trying to do with SMEs, and one of the incredible things about our region, I found this quite amazing when I learned it, was that there are more women opening businesses in sub-Saharan Africa than there are men. That's phenomenal. I think that speaks to women make a plan, right? If something's not happening, women make a plan. So how do we empower these SMEs to do business better? What are their requirements? And we're working directly with some of these SMEs on things like digital transformation. I mean, how do they participate in e-commerce? They shouldn't be excluded from e-commerce. So we need to think about how to empower them on digital transformation, but also innovation. So specifically things like, okay, now I don't need to do collections in cash. I can have low-cost acceptance that enables me to, reliably collect payments. This sort of thing, I think, is, again, a practical example, we should all think about how we can take and implement in our own businesses. Thanks.
I just have 2 more questions.
Maybe let me just
Okay.
because I'm just reminded now she's saying something. The issue of credit and credit processes is, on the one hand, very complex. On the other hand, it is very simple. So I encourage our young professionals here who work in the banks, make it your interest to be in the credit department. And those who sit in the bank boards, which is what I did, the committee I wanted to sit on was a credit committee. That is because the commotion is happening in that committee. A lot of conversation is going on in that committee. And of course, the whole thing about protecting your depositors, which is also your grandmother this side, and also flexibility for the rural people, which is also your grandmother this side. You need to understand that credit committee conversation deeply so that you can carry it to the rural areas now and apply and rearrange something there that makes it work here. So, for example, if somebody here is working in Cape Town, is a teacher, and retires today and get a lump sum of 1 million rands, the banks want her. They're running after her now. She's a millionaire. But she comes from Tendane now. She decides to go back home and take that 1 million rands, build herself a home in Tendane, buy cattle and all of that. Immediately she does that, she's poor now. The banking process, the credit committee process, because that house has no title deed. The credit committee process says she is poor. She's no longer a million. You just take a train and go back home tomorrow. You've moved from being a millionaire to being a nothing. That is because your assets are not recognized. And so the banking system has got to be made and forced to understand these assets. They are much more reliable than some of the most recognized assets in the urban areas. Your house in the rural area is more valuable than a TV here. But the bank recognizes the TV and doesn't recognize this beautiful house. But for us to do that, we need to have these conversations on both sides and translate the madness into the credit committee process in the banks and make it work. Effectively, that is what Wiphold has done. Because
amazing.
People have been turned into poor people when actually they're not poor.
So, Soma, my next question was around partnerships between government, private sector, and civil society, especially the potential to collaborate effectively to implement gender-responsive policies and programs. that catalyze women's economic progress. And perhaps in the context of what you've said, you can just expand and talk about collaborations and again in getting through literature on Wiphold that is not explicit in what I've read. But what kind of partnerships do you think are important, and what partnerships have you engaged in to ensure this catalysis?
So a number of partnerships. Tobago is going to battle it out there to make it work for us, and she's doing that. Behind her, we need to give meaning to that thing that she's trying to do. So the partnership model, one is that if you avoid knowing how rural life works, if you do not want to know how that ecosystem looks like, you're not going to solve it. So we've got to be determined about this. And rural areas are very nice anyway. I think Serobe wants us to go to Gokwana every day. But the reality of what's going on there needs to be done something to. For example, partnering with the short-term insurance, for example, to say, these cattle need insurance cover because they also die and get injured. As soon as you do the insurance cover, you are doing two things. When they die, they get refunded. At the moment, they are not. Two, once they are covered, the banks recognize them as assets. You are now dealing with non-Tobago this side, you are dealing with the banks this side, you are also dealing with the traditional leaders in the rural areas this side to say, let's combine our efforts, make it work. And it is a partnership that needs to be done if you are going to go the rural way. None of this says that the traditional leaders own the land. I don't want to be misunderstood to say that. But they are a reality in the rural areas. You can't avoid them. Even government has an act around the traditional areas. And so that partnership of the traditional leaders, the banks, and then treasury, and to make sure that you are not collapsing the system because you are angry with our exclusion. That is a collaboration I see.
Great, thank you. Funeka? Would you like to add?
Yeah, no, I think that, in the last couple of years, I've seen examples, very, very small examples of what can be done in these partnerships between particular, the community banks as well as government. I'll give you two examples. If you think about after the COVID, the Reserve Bank came out and gave banks basically low capital and low funding so that we can ultimately give people bounce back loans. Right now, the Reserve Bank is running a scheme for solar panels so that you can get a low interest rate loan. But there's so much more we can do. I think those schemes must extend to access to women for entrepreneurship because as well as things like student funding to a much greater extent. So these problems, I think that as Mam Gloria, like to the extent that you've got both sides of the equation, it's not one person working on their own that can help them, that can solve these problems. It's when we work together as a society.
Okay, the last question is fairly complex. I think it's fairly complex for me as well. Phyllis Ndandala Jordan writes, I think it's South African Outlook, I think it's 1970 or somewhere there, writes about black womanhood and talks about ownership of land and livestock, and how women in Africa historically have owned land. So I just want, if you can, reflect. It's difficult to recall in recent memory because we have these experiences where women don't, I mean, African society is both patrilineal and patriarchal. So how do we recall history and understand the present and imagine the future where women have participated effectively in the social economies in their own context? Yes.
So let me start by saying it's by telling stories. The reason why I'm here, because when I was 11 years old, I heard a story of 4 women who were chartered accountants, including Usis Zodwa Manase there. And I was 11 years old one day in the rural areas, and my grandmother used to bring me pictures, like newspaper pictures of these women. And because of that, my dream was ignited. So I do think that we need to tell a lot more stories about women and wealth.
Thank you, Funeka.
Yeah, so I think it's a very complex problem, clearly. But I think also we have to really think about how we're setting ourselves up for success in the future and how we're setting up, generational leadership for the future. I have twin girls. They are 13 now. They are the bane of my existence and also give me the greatest joy. But they are both avid mathematicians. And one thing that I think we should do as a society, and this is across Africa, I see it in sub-Saharan Africa for sure, is how do we promote STEM subjects for girls, right? And how do we get young girls in their early developmental stages to take an interest in STEM? Because there is a direct correlation, and I work in data and services, so I use data all the time, between STEM and GDP growth and outlook. And I think that this is fundamental for us fixing the problem going forward. I recognize that there's a lot of challenges with the past, but how do we as women participate in economic growth going forward? And we have got to get our girls interested in, I work for a technology company, in technology. Let's not let them be in the situation where they are averse to digitization or they're on the back foot. Let's put them on the front foot and let's get them involved in STEM.
As you can tell, this requires a whole day because I'm a humanities and social sciences scholar. So I will argue that STEM needs humaneness in it.
We can debate that.
So just the last word, Mama Gloria.
Hey, the no program director because I had 2 interesting stories. It won't be 2 minutes. It won't be more than 2 minutes. The first one is that those who have the instruments and platforms have to help with transformation, use it. So the story I had is that one midnight, 20 years ago, I got a call from Usis Zanel. And Usis Zanel was instructing me to go to union buildings because there's a meeting of big business in union buildings. And she looked at the guest list of President Mbeki and found no women. And when she asked the husband, this conversation is happening at 11 at night. When she asked the husband, where are the women? Husband says, no, this is a guest list from Patrice. And so Susanna says, you are the host, and you will have women tomorrow morning. And so there we were in the morning at the union buildings at 7 a.m. and we were the first ones to arrive. There was 4 of us. Looks like there were 4 phone calls that evening. We went, even when we asked, Kutachwa ngantoni pasisana? Wathi andiyazi, yamba la meeting. So we went, and The rest is history.
That's great. I don't know whether we're going to have interaction with the audience. Two questions. Two questions. If you can please keep them short. You introduce yourself and then Chris.
Use this microphone.
Thank you very much. Please forgive me, I'm Madlamin, some of you know me. You know, I'm thinking Standwasam, and she knows me, that's why she's smiling. I'm thinking starting at the rural areas. It's not rural areas, it's people who are there. Our socialization as girls, guys, let's be aware. What do we tell our children from day one? For you not to go into that crawl. Who told you not to go into that crawl? What will happen to you when you go into that crawl? What has happened to our girls who have forced their ways to go into education? Let's be honest, I'm talking to mothers, grandmothers, sisters, whatever. What have we done to ourselves? I mean, I would like us to start there and be honest going forward in terms of what could be some of the solutions. Let's not socialize our children, our girl children, or now girls, children, full stop. But even boys, we give them wrong messages. Boys don't cry, this, that. They are the ones who go into the crawl. When their father dies at 2 years, no, please, guys.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. We'll take that as a comment, a great comment too, isn't it? I think it's a great lesson. Second question. Oh, okay.
Thank you so much to our panel. Ma'am Gloria, what can we do practically in this 2024 for us to see more Wipholds, more Mahlakos, more WDBs, more NMTs, more brimstones? What are some of the practical steps that women in this room and other women who want to do what you've done, how can they advance that agenda? And Sis Funeka, for you, we heard from Osis Nontobeko this morning that financial services is struggling to meet the transformation targets across the board. Investments, the banks, it's a real struggle. How can we support the transformation agenda as depositors, as shareholders, as investors, as women whose assets are sitting in those institutions? How can we lend our voice to assisting the advancement of the transformation agenda in financial services in this country?
Thank you so much. So the 1 minute, I've instructed to say take for 1 minute. So let's start with Mama Gloria.
I've said to Nozala and WTB and some of us, the old empowerment companies, that the one way to fast track that is, now that we are known, 30 years later, we are known. Let's then make use of that to get the unknown ones to be known. So if we have done a deal with Old Mutual, it means there's a conflict. We cannot do a deal with Sanlam. Take those that are not known to Sanlam. Because the space for competition is not there yet. The stakes are high. Move them to Sanlam, move them to Investec, make them do these big deals somewhere else because you can't do them anyway. And that is the only thing I can say. And then, of course, we use all our networks to actually, because others want to be big in corporations, others want to be in private equity, others want to do deals. Just do all of that because we are now known. That is my suggestion.
Thank you. The other question was directed to
Thank you,
Funeka.
Sisi. That's such a good question. I think that while Sis Nontogozo is right, Uguti, many financial institutions miss their targets, but some animals are more equal than others. Some people are very behind. Some people are almost there. I work in an organization that I can only call, we're almost at Wakanda, basically. Wherever you look, left, right, there's black people, left, right, there's women. So what I'm gonna ask you is, make your money work. Don't go and do business with institutions, financial services or not, that ultimately are not supportive to the agenda of the country. Look, this data is available. So all the extent to which, so if we think about the construct of ESG, one of the ESs is issue around governance as well as social contribution. Don't just bank, don't just insure, don't just buy clothes, don't buy food in organizations that are not supportive to the agenda of the continent. So that's the help that we need. Thank you.
Thank you so much. There's lots of hands, but can I just, we're not taking any more questions. What I'm going to ask is that through the program director, that perhaps we open up space later on. We can't take hands. I'm sorry. We can't take any more hands. So just, I think as you know now, I'm a social scientist, humanities scholar, and I'm in university. What I would really like us to do as university, Professor Puleng, is that I think our role is to document and curate these great stories. Not only that, I think we don't want just a biography of Umama, Serobe. We don't want just a biography, but we want universities to engage on intellectual thoughts, philosophy behind their thinking. And when we talk, I don't know the theories of economics and science, I don't know. When we talk about what you call fathers of the disciplines, we must have mothers, and we must have African mothers of the disciplines. So it's our role as scholars and also young people which are filling this room. Thank you very much to the panel for such engaging work. Thank you.